that bit. So today we have Elaine Leen with us, and Elaine's been doing work for us for a while, some training, also coaching work. And Elaine, we knew her first as a student for Beckett McEnroy Coach Me. Fabulous to have you here, Elaine. Elaine lives in France and she's doing a number of different things on her own right now with her own company. And I'll leave you, Elaine, to introduce yourself a little bit deeper, and I look forward to the session. Welcome,
Th-
everyone, and welcome, Elaine.
Thank you very much, Claire, for the introduction and welcome everyone. I can see a few faces that I know. Hi, Jackie, Sabine. Um, I'm just wondering how to share my screen. I'm not very familiar with Zoom,
So
so
at the bottom, there should
at the
be a line
bottom.
of different things to do. One of them's a green arrow saying share.
Okay. Uh, let's see. Here we are. Just let me know if
It's
you. I think that
coming.
should be okay.
We can see it. Perfect.
Okay, great. Thank you. Um, let me see if that's it. We've got it moving along. So the technical part's sorted out. Um, so welcome everyone, and I'm really glad to see some familiar faces and these coaches here, because today isn't about learning what a 360-degree tool is. It's more about exploring what these tools generally support, if they generally support development and when they don't, and what's changing in the landscape of the 360-degree tools at the moment, especially as feedback becomes richer, faster, and more automated with AI. And I'll be drawing on some research, yes. And after this community cafe, I can share the presentation with you, but also the scientific papers that I've come across and some scientific references. So, yes, I'll be drawing on research, but mostly on practice, on what actually happens in the room when a 360-degree lands and what we as coaches do that makes a real difference. So this is very much a community cafe, and I'll invite you to use the chat to raise your hands. I hope I'm going to be able to see them because I'm juggling with the PowerPoint and your faces. And I invite you to think alongside about the practice as we go along. And I don't have the answers for the future of the 360-degree tools, but I have a few opinions on what could be going on. And the presentation, as I said, will be made available. And before we dive in, I just want to make sure that we're all aligned on what a 360-degree feedback is. So it's a multi-source assessment approach that collects perceptions of an individual's behavior and performance from multiple stakeholders, managers, peers, direct reports in their professional environment, alongside their own self-assessment. And what's important to remember is that it's other people's perceptions compared to the individual's own perceptions. So could you just say in the chat if you have already used, and if I can see the chat, yes, if you've already used 360-degree tools? If you could just put that in the chat. Yes, 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 several from Isabel. Yes. Okay. Just see if I can just looking to see where the rest of the chat is. Participants, I can see the chat is next to that. Yes, just a second. I'm just getting used to going around the screen as it did. Team level. Yes, yes, yes. So mostly everybody here. That's great. Great. You'll have lots of experience to share then. Because there's not that many of us, please don't hesitate to take your mics off and to raise a hand if you want to intervene at any time. It'll be a pleasure to take your comments and your suggestions and so on. So let's dive in. So, what actually is a 360-degree feedback for? Um, Many of these tools were born in a very different organizational mindset, one that was focused on measurement, comparison, and sometimes even control. And what's interesting is that the tools themselves haven't changed as much as our intentions have. So, historically, in fact, they emerged, and most of you probably already know this, in the 1950s with the US Air Force through peer evaluations. And this approach gained momentum in the 80s in large American organizations. I think it came over to France I'm talking about France because that's where I live, in the 1990s. And since the early 2000s, this has been used it's evolved from a one-off diagnostic to a more structured development process. Um, and Today, it's used across three main domains, which is individual development for increasing awareness, supporting leadership development and career transitions, and team and collective diagnosis. So, when you aggregate the data to identify shared strengths, risk, and development priorities, and it's used in HR processes for example, succession planning, high potential identification, and leadership pipelines. And there have been surveys showing that more than 90% of large US organizations use 360-degree feedback in some form or another. And it's also, as we know, widely embedded in MBA and executive education programs. So, again, if you could write this in the chat or intervene, how have you most often seen 360-degree used yourselves? If you could just put that into the chat. So, Peter, tool for development, directly self-awareness for managers and support them on their growing development. Yes. What else do we have? We have a mention of risk as well as development strengths. Yeah, impact is mentioned, used at the start or end of leadership coaching. What succession planning for Sonia? And Sabine talks about a soft bilan in French. Gwen, individual development awareness. Isabel, development starting point for a coaching. Yeah, sort of fine, lovely, lovely. Okay, okay. So I can see that you're all very familiar with this. That's great. Okay, moving on. So you've probably used it yourself and seen when it's worked well, but maybe also when things go wrong. And I've noted down three different reasons, I suppose, when things can go wrong. For example, when we're fixing on the scores, when there's false objectivity and defensive energy. So these are not usually the actual tool problems, they're process and relationship problems. And I don't know if you've come across any of these, or even something else that we can discuss. Um, Beneficiaries of the process can become too attached to the actual scores they have, rather than what these perceptions are indicating. And I'd like to do a quick experiment if you're all willing to participate in this. Um, on a scale of 1 to 6, 6 being the highest score possible, where would you put yourself if you always showed mastery in a competency? So from a scale to 1 to 6, 6 being the highest, where would you put yourself? For example, if you were applying to your own 360-degree process questionnaire with, for example, if the statement was encourages constructive interaction thanks to her listening ability. So now you have something even more precise. So I'm seeing some 4s, some 5s, some 6s. Okay. Sabine says a 6. Rena has a 4. Okay. So we have quite a wide range there from 4 to 6. And we're talking about mastery. We're talking about complete mastery. So you can already see that the scales that we use ourselves vary. Some of us think that 4 is the highest we could put because maybe there's room for improvement. And some people might put 6 because they think that's the best I can possibly do. So just as you have a variation in your own scales when you're scoring for yourself, then the people that are replying to the questionnaire on your behalf, they will have variation in their scales as well. So, so we have this danger, and it's one of the limitations, is that we can look at a 360-degree report, see the scores, and as a beneficiary, automatically translate it into our own scale. When in fact, you might see a 4 and say, "Oh, they didn't score very high." Where in fact, for them, that's the best mark they can give you because that's what they would have given to themselves for high mastery. If you see what I mean. So the one of the problems with the 360-degree is that it can create a false sense of objectivity. Because the output is numerical. We're talking about figures and percentages and averages. And so we're switching into a kind of logical stance. We're looking at all these numbers and we start thinking of these perceptions as actual facts. But a 360-degree doesn't measure performance, it measures how behavior is experienced by others. And in the feedbacks that I have conducted, over 500 of them, I know it says it in the introduction to and the announcement for the Community Cafe that I've done thousands of uh, feedback interviews. I have, but not all on 360-degree tools. The rest are on other psychometric tools. So I've done over 500 feedbacks, and I wish that I'd taken the time to journal everything through the years, but I didn't. But I do have 4 memorable, very strong negative reactions that I had to deal um, with this kind of defensive energy that we can see here. One of them resulting in a person resigning from the company he was working for. And the 3 others didn't go to such an extent. And 2 of them managed to turn the situation around so that the final outcome was beneficial to them after that initial rejection. But that was because there was this false objectivity, fixation on the score, and they were in like a defensive, energy. So the real shift that we need to get uh, is to go from what do others think of me to what do I make of this? And That's where we come in as coaches. And I think one of the biggest takeaways from this, once we've looked at all the research, etc., is that a 360-degree as a standalone without any explanations, conversations, dialogue doesn't work. Doesn't work, and it can even be counterproductive. And I can see Sonia's nodding her head. Maybe you've had that experience already, have you? I remember one director I was starting to coach, and the 360-degree was the first step in the coaching. And he'd already planned an away day for his team. And when he got the results, it was very clear that his direct reports were not satisfied with his management style because out of a scale of 1 to 6, um, that was the tool we were using. It was on a scale from 1 to 6. He was getting 2s and 3s. So the first reaction was, well, if that's what they think of me, then I am going to cancel straight away this away day. Why should we spend money, take the time to go away and do all of this if that's their opinion? And he was very upset. And I looked at the verbatim and I said, "What can you see in the verbatim that just shows how you've reacted?" And he looked at verbatim. The verbatim said, he reacts to this and he has emotional outbursts and so on and so on. So he came to the conclusion that in fact the verbatim was the way he just acted was what the verbatim was saying. So he said, "Well, okay, so I don't cancel this away day, but what do I do? What do I do, Elaine?" And I said, "Well, what is the opposite of what you normally do?" And he said, "Apologize." I'm not going to apologize to them. Then he came to the conclusion with this dialogue that he was actually going to apologize to them for being a manager that wasn't satisfying their needs and so on and so on. And he started the away day with exactly that, saying, "Thank you very much for applying to my 360 survey. And it was very useful. And thank you for pointing things out. And I apologize." And that turned everything around because the people that replied, they were I suppose hesitant about being honest in their opinion, and and they were also wondering how he was going to take all of this, even though the results were anonymous. It was from the group of direct reports, and they discovered between themselves that they'd all marked low, and so that there was possibly going to be a reaction. So they were so relieved, and in fact, they had a really good day. They had a really good day after that, and I think that's maybe one of my best success stories with 360-degree feedback. So, why does 360-degree feedback drive change or resistance? And I want to pause here for a moment because this is the more psychological engine behind whether a 360 actually leads to change or we just put the report in a drawer and it dies away. So the research behind this is very much grounded in self-determination theory, one of the most robust motivation theories that we have. And it's something quite simple. What it says is that people change when 3 psychological needs are supported. So the first one is competence. That is, the person needs to feel, I can see how to get better. I can actually see how I can improve. I feel that even though it might be difficult, I should have the competency for that. So it's also linked to self-efficacy. The second one is I choose what I do with this. So in other words, I'm not being told. This feedback has to be informational and not controlling. If we said, the scores and the verbatim are pointing out that you definitely need to improve this, if that kind of language, then the moment of feedback sounds more like a verdict. So there can be drop in motivation because the person isn't the person who is choosing what to do with it. And the third one is relatedness. That means that when people feel understood and not judged, um, they they tend to start to want to change. So those three things need to be present. And now here's the paradox that the research highlights, and this is something I actually love, is that if the feedback is too soft, too agreeable, if we're championing our our managers that have done this 360, saying, this is not that bad, you're doing great, and we can get what we call, and I'm not so sure how this is pronounced, cacophony effect. This is where, in fact, you're being so agreeable that people don't actually believe it. You know, they don't believe it. And so what happens here is that um, they there's comfort in the feedback and it's pleasant, but people aren't actually going to change. And we can see that in two areas. This effect is that it can be when the raters actually soften the comments themselves and they inflate the scores because they're concerned about naming tensions, especially if there's some sort of hierarchical connection. So the data looks nice, and harmless, and therefore less transformative. And sometimes we do say, in fact, raters have said to me, because sometimes I've spoken also with the raters and not just the person being rated, have said to me, I gave a low score because I wanted to stand out. I wanted the person to see, not because I think it's worth a two, but I wanted it to stand out. So that can be done. But the opposite is also very often where, you're getting on quite well with your manager and you don't want to give a score less than four or whatever the average would be, because you just don't want to rock the boat. So it can be there when we see this psychophancy effect, or it can even be the coach themselves being overly supportive and reluctant to introduce any discomfort into the feedback session. So when it feels good, when there's all this, when it's too soft, there's no change. However, if it's too blunt and too honest and accurate, I suppose, it can be rejected. So there's a soft spot that we have to reach. And the power of the 360 feedback is in that narrow, sweet spot between honest enough to stretch the competencies and human enough to protect relatedness and open enough to preserve autonomy. And this is why a 360 alone is never enough. It's the conversation that's going to activate the motivation. Okay, just trying to move on here. And for some reason, it's blocked. No, there it is. So, what research is telling us, and the question asked is, does a 360-degree feedback work? And the research has been quite consistent over the last 20 to 25 years. 360 feedback, the good news is that it can support development, and you've probably already seen that, or you all have seen that, hopefully, but it's only under certain conditions. And feedback on its own, we've seen studies on this, show that it increases awareness, maybe, but not sustained behavior change. And what predicts development is not whether the feedback is objectively true, but whether the person can make sense of it, without becoming defensive. And to avoid this defensiveness can appear, it means that we also need the process to be fluid, to avoid frustration, make it anonymous, and so on. So when the 360 feedback is combined with coaching and follow-up and clear developmental intent, the likelihood of change increases significantly. So it's not about the tool, basically. It's about how the feedback is delivered, how the person can integrate that, and what how we follow up the development plan. Quite clearly, that's what it's all about. I did my own a little bit of research. It's not a scientific study, unfortunately. It's just a field lens. So across nearly 50 participants, well, actually, it was 49 to be precise, last year. The overall experience of the 360 process is very positive, with most of the scores on the questionnaire that was given. It was just a 3-minute quick questionnaire with about 5, 6 questions, where the person just had to put between 1 and 10 what they thought of the process and the coach and the feeling that they had that they were actually going to do with something with all of this. And this study was done before. I mean, it was done almost immediately after the end of the 360 process. It would be interesting to redo this with the same people, kind of 6 months down the line, to see how they'd developed along the way. But what we saw was that most of the scores were clustering between 8 and 10 out of 10. It was a study on all various sectors, public and private, with a wide range of roles and team sizes and job descriptions for the different people that went through the 360-degree process. So let me share a few numbers, just enough to anchor us in a bit of reality. So what came out top, as you can see, with an 8.8 out of 10, is the coaching conversations. That was what got the highest scores in that small field study. Overall satisfaction with the process, which I haven't put on the slide, is 8.3, which is already strong. And we have ongoing development motivation, 8.5, and the tool itself is still highly rated at 8.1, but consistently below in all of the different scorings every time before the rational and coaching elements. Does that surprise any of you? No. Okay. Any questions so far? Any comment?
I think for me, it's all ringing very true. And I think it's nice to, particularly that bit about, the relational issue being important and the coaching conversation
Mm.
being important. And can I ask, Elaine, will we get a copy of these slides, please?
Yes, certainly. Yes,
Great.
certainly. Yeah,
Mhm.
and as I mentioned right at the beginning, also the scientific references and papers.
Great.
I'll send them to Claire, or I don't know how they're normally distributed. But it'll save you from having to find them some
Thank you.
out in internet somewhere. Yeah,
And
with
I was
pleasure.
sorry, go ahead,
Oh, so
Jacqueline. Or-
sorry, who was wanting to speak?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, one of the additional risks that I've come across is to what extent does the environment in which the manager or the person evolving, is there a real feedback culture?
Mm.
Because one of the difficulties I've come across is you can put in place a great tool, as you say yourself, and the person can be very open. But if the people, if there's not a feedback culture, and it goes beyond the relationship, the bilateral
Mhm.
relationship or the collective relationship with the manager themselves, it's a much bigger issue.
Just that.
I think it's certainly one of the questions in the past that before when I was talking with clients is, do we do a 360, that they need to take that into consideration. And so do I, as their coach, because that's always, I think, going to put a coloration or taint somehow the degree, with which I don't know what people think about that one, but I think it is a huge risk on the feedback culture in the organization.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline, for mentioning that. And it's something that I'm going to share with in the next slide because um, in the next slide, I'm talking about, if I can move it on, here we go.
Can I
Are
just
you
ask
also,
you, Elaine?
yes,
Sorry,
There's a
sorry.
question
before
in
you
this
go.
in the chat, and I think Peter had a question too, though.
I was
Thank
just
you, because
gonna.
I'm not seeing everything. Could
I
you?
was, I was just going to ask. I mean, one of the things for me is that I think the fact that coaching conversation matters more um, than the tool by your. I think is so important because quite often, and in my experience, some of these things get done and then they just get left. Do a 360 is on a shelf and never to be talked about again. So I think it's not only the actual tool, it's the actual process by which the tool is administered, and pick up the point that's made again about the system in which the person works, which I think is also fundamentally important.
Hmm.
And Sabine Elaine's asking, how do you deal with someone that rejects all the results of his 360 or her 360?
Well, one time, I mean, every case is different. Every case is different. But once I had somebody who threw the keys of their training company at me because it was a lady director of a training company. She didn't actually throw them at me. That you know, she had the report and she looked at the first page and oh wow. And she just took the keys out of the bag and said, right, well, it wasn't against me. It was they can all go and and they'll find somebody else. And she just put the keys on the table. So what I did there was let's go for a walk, let's have a coffee, and we didn't even look at the 360. We talked about what was going on, what was there was lots of things coming out. She'd actually it was somebody who'd been struggling with cancer, and she'd made loads of effort. She'd gone above and beyond what she should have done because she was recovering from cancer and so on. And so she was so upset. And so we just went for a walk and we had a chat and we didn't actually come back to the results for about, I think it was the third coaching session. And when she was calmer and that was one of the I suppose another impactful 360 degree that I had was that it didn't really to put it shortly, the very bad results she was getting were coming from her executive committee. So she replaced them. Now, was that beneficial or not? It was actually beneficial because of the organization and the way Jacqueline was talking about the system in which we're doing this 360 degree. And it was something that needed to be done. So anyway, it was beneficial for her in the end, and it took quite a while to get there. Yeah. I think there's another something else being said here. Oh, ouch. Oh, okay. Yeah,
Anyone
it
else any
definitely.
questions? Renu's got a question.
Thanks, Elaine.
So
Great insights. Just a question. Have you observed any differences in which people from different generations are receptive to feedback? People in a certain age group, a certain demographic, while the organization culture and the culture of where you belong kind of definitely factors in. Any insights on that? I was curious. Thanks.
It's more linked to personality than to factors like age or culture. It's more linked to personality and the way the people are approaching this. But also, and this is what I'm going to come to talk about, is the way it's communicated within the organization.
Mhm.
Because if the people that are participating are told by their HR people or whatever, this is a gift. This is something we're doing for you as a manager to develop your competencies because we want you to be the best managers possible. This is to make you more employable. This is an investment that we're giving you. We're spending money on this for you, as a gift. And if what the process is going to be, and they say it's a developmental. And after you've had your feedback, then we're going to look at individual plans, development plans, and we're going to support you along the way. And there's not going to, in other words, they're reassuring them, they're showing the whole process and everything, so that they come into the process in a confident way. Because one of the things that we need from a research point of view is that they have to be volunteers. And, quite often they're not volunteers because the HR people say, right, all of these managers here, we're going to put them in a cohort and they all have to go through a 360-degree. But they become volunteers when it's explained to them in a very clear way what the path is going to be and the fact that it's an investment and they're going to be helped and supported afterwards. So that's showing that. Because what I was going to say on this slide, so as you can see, those are the real live comments that were in that field study. Not everyone had the same experience. I was talking about, most of the scores were between 8 and 10, but there were a few 3s and 4s. So obviously something that didn't work well. The 3s and 4s weren't on the coaching conversation. They were on everything else. Everything, the fact that they didn't feel motivated to change anything. And looking into the data, it was linked to this kind of lack of transparency from the organization who was ordering the 360s about what was going to be done, or even if previously 360 degrees have been done in the organization and it landed badly. If you're introducing a 360-degree feedback for the first time in an organization and whatever, a company, then it's a great opportunity to start getting this transparency and feedback. But also, there's quite a responsibility for it to go well, because if it goes badly, then they probably never want to do it again. Because it can have negative, as I said, negative effects. So we get high scores on this because our clients, these HR professionals that order the 360, they're thoroughly convinced that the purpose is for development. And they're ready to support the people over time. So that's one of the questions we ask in our scoping meeting is, what's going to happen afterwards? Maybe we will not be coaching them. We will be giving the feedback, maybe talking about their individual development plan. And then we hand it over to the managers of these people or to the HR people. And sometimes they have trainings and they have this and they have that and whatever. But we always ask what's going to happen next, what's going to happen afterwards when they come with these axes for development, because if they come with all these expectations of being supported by the organization, and the organization says, right, okay, you've got your individual development plan and we're just going to stop there. It's up to you to develop yourself. Well, motivation can fall. The only suggested improvements were not process related or with the coach. It was more about the tool. So that's interesting, that it's more about refinement. It's not about rejection of the process or anything. It just shows us that the participants were engaged and thoughtful. So, sorry. So what I looked for, talking about actually analyzing the reports, what I feel makes a difference is the contracting, and we've gone over this in a bit of a way, is contracting both with the HR people usually, and like we do in coaching, it's a third-party agreement between the person who's going to benefit from the 360 degree and the HR people or the manager or whatever. And this contracting obviously aims to clarify the purpose, the expectations, and as I said, what's happening after the 360 feedback. Timing can be equally important. Sorry, I'm not on the right slide. Let me go on this, and I'll come back to the other one if we need to. Timing can be equally important because I recently conducted a 360 degree for all the members of the executive committee of an industry that was restructuring. So when you hear the word restructuring, you know that they're getting rid of people because the company had been suffering over the past 5 years. It's in an industry where the whole, not just their particular company, but the whole industry in the market has been suffering over the past 5 years. So you can imagine that the raters who are replying to this questionnaire, they am I on the right page there? No. Yes, I am. They were quite dissatisfied and frightened. So all of the leaders got some really bad results. And it wasn't about them necessarily. It was about what was happening in the company. So that's why timing can be important. What's happening in the organization. Is it a fusion? Is it a takeover? Is it all those sort of things? It might not be the right time to do a 360 degree feedback. But also what's happening at the same time within the organization. For example, in one case, we came in to do some 360 degree feedback, and there were assessments as well, other assessments. People were in an assessment center. So there was a bit of confusion, and there was a lot going on. There was lots of tests going on at the same time, 360 assessment centers and so on. And in another case, there were the annual interviews at the same time. So there was kind of confusion there between, is this 360 for proof for the annual interview, or what is it? So, and then it could just be the timing could be wrong because of the workload of everybody. If you're a manager and you need to give feedback on 10 direct reports, that's a lot of time. Even if you have nowadays questionnaires that are really quite quick to answer. I've got a question from Renu. How do organizational structures play a role, micro-based versus a matrix type? Would a 360 be applicable everywhere? I'm not quite sure I understand your question, Renu. Could you take the microphone to...
Elaine, thanks. So I'm going back to my corporate experience. I was HR for, say, a construction company and a very, very hierarchy-based organization, promoter-based, where the boss told everybody what is to be done and you were supposed to follow. And there was another organization that was more tech startup-based, where you had cross-functional reporting, you had matrix structures, etc. What I saw in the construction company before I'd actually joined, a 360 was conducted. And I actually had to deal with the aftermath of it because it landed very differently. Because the bosses looked at, how can my peer give me feedback? How can my junior give me feedback? Your role is not to give me feedback as per our structure. And in a matrix organization, it landed very differently. So my question was, is while 360 is valuable, does it have scope of application everywhere?
Uh, I would say my first answer would be yes, because you have the different categories, and I think the question we need to ask is, are the people who are going to rate in a capacity to observe the behaviors that they're supposed to be measuring? And that's I think for me is the main question, you know. Um, and it may be difficult for some people to give feedback because it's not in the culture of the company to give feedback about their peers or about their managers. And that's why also in the scientific evidence that I'm going to send to you, we have something very strong about it being anonymous, that they're saying that it has to be anonymous. Yes, you know by category, but you don't know which person in that category is giving that information back. But really, do people know each other well enough to be able to observe the behaviors that we're supposed to be measuring? And I know they're perceptions, but these perceptions come from somewhere. I think there's a new question in the chat. Not so sure. No, I think I've got all of them so far. Okay, so there's also the pace. The pace can be the pace of the process, I'm saying, can sometimes be imposed by the organization. If they're doing a campaign of 360-degree feedbacks. And so we talk about that as well. We talk about, are you leaving them enough time? Are you leaving enough time for the questionnaires to be filled in? Are you leaving them enough time to have their feedback interviews? Are you leaving them enough time to actually think about these feedback interviews afterwards and to draw up their individual development plans? Because if we're rushing it through, some people will be quite okay with quick pace, and other people may just need more time. And so adapt it as much as we can to each individual as far as the pace is concerned. We tend to leave at least 2 weeks from when we've done the feedback interview to when we talk to them about and we challenge them on their individual development plan, so that we've already discussed it in the feedback interview. What's coming up for you, and what objectives, blah 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 blah, and so on, and then we let them digest all of that if we can. And then permission, as in all our coaching conversations, whether they are linked to 360 degrees or not, is the permission to discuss all of this with them. We've set up an alliance with the person, and can we actually go and challenge them on all of this? Hey, so what AI will change, and what we're seeing already. What we're seeing already, the trends at the moment are more frequent feedbacks and kind of pulse surveys. just taking the pulse instantly. Lots of digital formats and quite a lot of integration with HR platforms. We're also seeing a combination of the coaching and the e-learning that becomes automatic. So, for example, there are tools out there that actually do some analysis, and a lot of our 360 people, the ones that are taking the 360, when they get their reports, they run it through ChatGPT or Claude or whatever. Try and get some instant, what do I need to improve information? And some editors are already using some kind of embedded AI system in that for the feedback. So speed, volume and frequency. And we're going to get more data, more precise data, faster feedback, and these continuous singles. And you could even imagine a fluid system. I don't think it exists today, but you could, we talked about the scale of where a person would rate. Some people would automatically rate a 6 when it's what they think in mastery, and other people, the highest they would give would be maybe a 4 or 5, where we could actually imagine a system whereby if it's the same rate as 6 months along the line, we'll see if their actual rates have changed. There's all sorts of things, more data analytics. But what it won't change is that it won't, as far as I know now, it won't tell a human being what matters and what to ignore, or even when to slow down. I've actually myself used AI with, I've developed an AI agent, so I've tried to train it on what to look for in 360 feedback. And I also, yes, obviously analyze the report with my own cognitive biases and so on. And I make hypotheses of, that score's low, so maybe this is something that needs to be developed, and so on and so on. And what I can tell you is that more than half the time, my hypothesis, quite similar to AI's, and in fact, more than half the time when I actually do the feedback interviews, when I take into account the whole system the person's in, what's happening, the conversation, everything, then those hypotheses fall. And it's not because there's a low score that we need to develop it, in fact. And the AI is at the moment, and that could be because I'm not doing the right prompts. At the moment, the AI is not as fine-tuned as at the moment I am. But I think that will change. That will change, obviously, with better prompts and over time. So the judgment is about discernment. AI can tell us what is likely based on past data, but it can't decide what matters in the context with these people and these consequences. And we as coaches, we can say this is statistically interesting, this score here, but what is the real issue here? If there is one, that is. We can look at things that need ethical awareness and context, and not just statistical accuracy. And the integration is all about putting those figures and numbers in the right place. And the agency, well, ourselves, we can't replace agency. The AI will not replace agency, and neither can we. I mean, we need to leave the agency with the person having the 360-degree feedback. But what we can do as coaches is support them, help them change their perspective, and so on and so on. So that's, for the moment, I don't think AI will replace all of those factors there. And as I can see it, the coach's role is evolving. It used to be, especially when the tools first appeared, but we're talking about 50 years ago, it used to be to explain the report. Now what we can do is send, a how to read your report, and we know they may possibly be putting it themselves into a chat GPT system or something. What the scores mean, where are the gaps, and so on and so on. And we can we can still explain the report. AI is helping with that, with the summarizing, the comparing, and so on and so on. But now our role is making sense of all of that, making sense and partnering on this sense making. So we're going from, feedback to context. We're going from insight to choice, and not what does the report say, but what does this mean for you now and how you lead. And so that's all for today.
Elaine, so sorry, you've got me thinking about all sorts of things. I've just put a big blur in the chat there. Anyone, any questions? We've got just a few minutes left of Elaine's very generous time that she's given us. Any questions?
When you run 360s, when you run 360s into AI, the ICF is very particular about I don't know what they call them, the identifiable information is not allowed. And I struggle with that because I'll download the 360 into a PDF editor, take the names out, but then I'm like, well, am I doing something wrong there? And then I put in AI. All these things, I have questions around that all the time and whether I'm doing it appropriately or not. And I use it as a check, like you said, Elaine. I don't just like send it in there. I do my own analysis, then I put it in, AI and say, okay, summarize this report for me. But I try and strip the names out by using Adobe. But am I violating anything by doing that? I often ask myself. So,
well, no. In fact, as I said, if we're saying that it's anonymous, if when you reply, your ratings and verbatim are anonymous, they have to remain anonymous. In the system I use, and I work for a psychometric test editor called Performance, and on the platform we have the possibility of going into, before it's in PDF form, we go into change officers' names or anything and we do that manually. Anything that is pointing to a particular person. For example, we have quite a few international companies, and some people will reply in Italian or English or French or whatever. And if you've only got one Italian colleague, you'll know. I mean, first of all, you might not be able to read Italian or whatever. So we actually translate the verbatim. We strip it of anything that we see is identifiable. Obviously, we can't do everything, because sometimes when somebody reads the verbatim, they say, "Oh, that's definitely my colleague. That's the way she writes." But because we don't know, we can't confirm that. We can't say, "But maybe it is." But it doesn't matter who it is. What are you going to do with this? But sometimes I wonder, for example, the people I'm working with, they will contact me and say, "Oh, Elaine, we've got some really tricky verbatim here. And, should we just take it away? Because it's not very constructive." For example, when they ask, what should this person do to improve their management? They say, leave the company, for example, or something that's going to be, not constructive. So even though we've given instructions to everybody about being as respectful and constructive as possible, some verbatim comes along. Well, it all depends on, the role of the person. I mean, I have decided to leave certain verbatim without tweaking it because it was the CEO, and I thought he should be ready for this. That's my discernment, and maybe I was wrong, but and sometimes we just soften it a bit because it's really not said in a respectful way. Yeah. Oh,
Just on that one as
Okay.
well, I had it was a profile on a team, and the team leader's leader got really quite upset because they didn't realize they'd be identifiable in the data.
oh,
But as a category,
oh,
there's only
yes.
one leader.
Yes,
And
yeah.
and my thinking was, and why does the team leader and the team not know what you think anyway?
Exactly, Claire. That's happened to us. That happened to us recently in a European institution where even though in the kickoff meeting where we explained to the people being observed and the observers and the person was there that if it's a manager, if it's only one person, it will obviously be identifiable. That really kind of created a wave. And I had exactly the same thoughts. I thought, well, that's your job really as a manager, isn't it? To give feedback to people in your team. So you you need to expect, yeah, it's yeah. And in fact, the institution said they were very transparent about everything. And I thought, you can't be that transparent if you're getting upset about this. Yes, exactly. One thing that I find useful in a 360 tool is for somebody who has to rate several people, that they actually see or have a report on how they rated each person. Because if they have a lot to do, they sometimes don't remember, and their direct report will come to them and say, "Why did you give me a 3 on this one?" And they go, "Did I give a 3 on that one? Can't remember." Sometimes find that useful.
Well, Elaine, fabulous session. Really appreciate it. We'll get the slides out and the link to everyone and the further information by the end of the week. Do keep in touch, everyone. We've got 2 complimentary community cafes. That's a lot of C's. Once a month, twice a month actually. And yeah, all different topics. Keep in touch. Thanks again, Elaine, and see you all
Pleasure.
soon.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Tout grand merci. Thank you very much, Helen.
Merci, Isabelle.
Thanks a
À
lot.
bientôt.
Really great.
Thank you.